Hey guys, welcome into the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven. I am your host. Really excited about today's show. I'm excited about every show because I just love talking about football. But joining me today are my guys Tyler and Alex. Alex, we'll start with you, man. How you doing?
Doing pretty good, and we finally figured out what was happening with Tyler's shirt. He fixed it, but I think it looked cooler before, so I think you should go back to it.
Tyler, how you doing, man?
Okay, fuck you. Sorry, I wore this shirt today. Jeez. How are the 76ers, Alex?
Oh, shit.
No comment.
No comment.
Well, Steven, I'm glad you're excited for today's show because while I do like talking about football, our main topics are Tyron Johnson and Brandon Facyson. So I'm glad you're pumped for this. I'm kind of excited to talk to you guys, but I mean, it's not like they're the most glorious topics.
Hey, man. Well, I'm always excited to talk to my guys. Still haven't met you, but I feel like I know you better than most of my inner circle friends, which is just kind of hilarious. But yeah, Tyler mentioned we're going to talk about Tyron Johnson and Brandon Facyson getting some love from Brandon Staley in his press conference, and being potentially listed as breakout players. We're also going to talk about Tom Brady again. Shout out to him for bringing the Chargers back into the conversation. And then our main topic today is the defensive line group. Like I said last time, we're going to be breaking down each position as we head into training camp, which as of today, as of recording this, we are officially 5 weeks away from training camp. So can't get here fast enough. All right, let's start with the Tom Brady conversation because for those who have not seen it, Tom Brady is a guest rather this coming week on LeBron's The Shop on HBO. And he had a comment about his free agency and, the teams that he was potentially signing with. And he said that there was a certain team that was kind of interested, not really. And then at the end, and he was really surprised. And he said, quote, "You're sticking with that motherfucker." And sorry about the expletives today if that bugs you, but that was a specific quote. Fuck. So it is what it is. So a lot of people were speculating, who is that mother effer that Tom Brady was specifically talking about? Could it have been Tyrod Taylor? Could it have been the Chargers situation? And then, of course, the NFL update page asked the question, would you take Tom Brady or would you take Justin Herbert for 15 years? So, Tyler, we'll start with you on this one. What are your general thoughts here with Tom Brady bringing the Chargers back into the news, back to the conversation? What did you think of that whole thing yesterday?
I mean, it first got, brought across my attention by Fernando's tweet with the big eyes, like, oh, maybe he's referencing the Chargers here. But like, to me, my understanding, and if it were true, and to be fair, half the things we hear about the Chargers don't end up being true anyway, or someone just ripping off some BS. So if they were interested, it just seemed like they were. If they were, I believe they were interested pretty much till the end. Yeah. So I don't think it's necessarily the Chargers that he's referencing there. Tyrod Taylor does fall under the category of "you're going with that motherfucker." Like, I think that he does fall under that category of guy. But otherwise, like, if the Bears were interested, I'd probably think it would be them, because the Chargers, at least, like, they knew if they were going to stick with Tyrod Taylor, they were probably going to draft a quarterback. So it's like, it's understandable. So for Brady to go, oh, they're going with that guy, like, I don't think it's the Chargers. So for them to stick with Trubisky instead of going with Brady, that makes a ton of sense. As far as the 15-year comment, first it was the, would you rather have the Super Bowl or Herbert? Like, in a vacuum of that question, I would want the Super Bowl. Sorry to Justin Herbert. I think he can take them to a Super Bowl, absolutely. But I want that Super Bowl, and I don't want to be that patient. My grandpa was like 75 when the Eagles won. I don't want to do this for the next 50 years, pretending like, oh, is this the year? Is this the year? No, I want that championship. But the question takes everything away from everything that happened last season. Right. From anything from the Chargers won't be a team that would ever sign Antonio Brown. The coaching staff was completely different. That coaching staff, Bruce Arians is the head coach, but the other two coordinators probably should have been head coaches this season, this cycle, or at least next cycle. And, the Chargers would have traded for Turner because they did that before Brady made a decision. They probably would have taken Wirfs But then it doesn't matter. By week 4, Brady probably blows out his ACL playing behind this line. Again, there's no money to sign anybody else. Unless you hit on all your draft picks, which Telesco wouldn't have. I don't see how they would have gotten past the Chiefs, past the Titans, or anybody just because Tom Brady is there. Like, I get the whole Brady way thing, but the Bucks defense was incredible during certain parts of the season, and certainly in the Super Bowl. The Chargers would have had 9 out of 11 players missing from that game. So I don't understand why the question was brought up. Like, oh, would you rather have, like, I don't know. It's just an odd question. Sure, I'd take the Super Bowl, but he would have not won a Super Bowl on this team.
Yeah. So in terms of which team was Tom Brady talking about, I think it was the Titans because of the whole the coach situation there. Also, Ryan Tannehill. I mean, Ryan Tannehill's great, and I think we know that now, but I could see someone like Tom Brady talking down to someone like Ryan Tannehill, and that's sort of why I thought it. Benjamin Albright seemed to kind of think the same thing. It could also be San Francisco or Chicago, but the Chargers were in it to the end, and they were offered him the same deal the Bucks did, from what we know. So I really don't think it was them. It was just that Tom Brady didn't want to come to the West Coast, and I was vehemently against him coming here. For a variety of reasons. Like you guys said, he would not have won a Super Bowl here. It made sense to go in a different direction and build towards the future, whether that was with Tyrod Taylor or Tyrod Taylor plus drafting a quarterback. It just didn't make sense to go after Brady with how this team, was structured. You could have gotten Tristan Wirfs in the draft or Jedrick Wills, but that would not have prevented Derwin James from getting injured. That wouldn't have prevented all of the litany of things that, happened. Like, yeah, sure, maybe they do go get Antonio Brown and sign Leonard Fournette and give in to Brady's demands. I think that could have happened, but I don't think that Tom Brady would have made the Chargers a contender. As far as the hypothetical, though, if you're just saying, okay, it's purely one Super Bowl or the next 15 years of Herbert, I was thinking about this today, and I'm like, Rich Eisen, I remember at the time was saying stuff like, oh, well, if Brady signs with the Chargers, I will get Chargers season tickets, and you wouldn't have worked last year if you got season tickets to the whole pandemic thing. But, I think Brady would have created a lot of buzz in the LA market and a lot of people who came to Chargers games. But I don't think he would have created a lot of Chargers fans, right? I mean, I think Brady is kind of Brady is the first kind of NFL version of LeBron going from team to team and, people following their favorite NBA players around. I really think he's the first of that kind of caliber of just like, oh, I'm going to go to this team and people are going to come. He wouldn't have created a whole generation of Chargers fans. I don't think that would have happened even if he had won a Super Bowl here, because then we would have drafted Kyle Trask this year, and then people would be waiting, the next 10 or 15 years to figure out if Kyle Trask is the guy, after Tom Brady is done playing. So, I think it's an interesting hypothetical, but at the end of the day, considering I don't really believe that Brady would have won a Super Bowl here this year or last year, I'll take 15 cracks at it with Herbert and see what you get. I think that's kind of the best, part of this. And the Chargers see themselves as an organization that is in Los Angeles for the next 20 years and creating the next generation of Chargers fans. Justin Herbert is somebody who's going to create Chargers fans for a long time. Tom Brady would have created Chargers fans for like 3 years, and then he would have retired, and then we would have been like, well, that was awkward. So like, I just don't, obviously I want the Chargers to win a Super Bowl more than anybody, but I kind of would just rather take, 15 cracks at it with Herbert than, do this whole Brady thing, especially considering it wouldn't have worked anyway.
Yeah, Alex, that's a great point. I didn't thought of that until just now. I think that is absolutely, and LA, sure, like, LA's been used to the whole kind of like mercenary method, if you will, with the Lakers in the past and with the Dodgers as well. So, but I do agree, obviously, with, the chances of creating a fan base, creating a culture in Los Angeles is far greater with Justin Herbert playing at the level that he did last year. As it pertains to like him choosing the Chargers or who this comment is about, I kind of agree with Tyler that it's probably about the Bears. I think some people were obviously like laughing at the Raiders because it's always, we are as Chargers fans, we always just want to laugh at the Raiders. But I don't think he ever seriously considered the Las Vegas Raiders because I think he knew that, the financial side of things with Derek Carr's contract were never really it was never a real possibility because I think the Raiders would have had to do a lot of juggling things. And Tyler said it right. In a vacuum, you take the guaranteed Super Bowl. But that's the thing is that takes away all the context. And my brain isn't X plus Y equals Super Bowl. The whole thing about the Chargers roster last year is that they were, a few pieces away from really contending. And, people kind of forget and people joke about him. But Brian Bulaga was the consolation prize and Chris Harris to not signing Tom Brady. Mm-hmm. So, if we're going down this list of things that would have had to happen, right? Tom Brady playing behind Jedrick Wills or Tristan Wirfs, and then Sam Tevy or Trey Pipkins on the other side, and Forrest Lamp and Dan Feeney. Maybe you keep Russell Okung in this scenario. Maybe not. I don't know. That's a lot of what ifs to really go down the box. But I guarantee you that offensive line, even with Tristan Wirfs and Russell Okung, is nowhere near as good as what Tom Brady had with the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers have arguably, a top 3 center. They have a top 3 right tackle, a very serviceable left tackle, very, very serviceable left guard and right guard, and they had really good depth. Then you add in all the weapons that both of you guys have talked about. And, some people back then were like, well, Tom Brady would help Anthony Lynn, bring the best out of Anthony Lynn. And it's would Tom Brady cover up some warts? Sure. Is he going to make Tom Brady look like Bruce Arians, Todd Bowles, and Byron Leftwich? Absolutely not. So I don't know. Just in a vacuum, yes, absolutely. You take the Super Bowl, but my mind doesn't work without all the context and with all of the butterfly effect that would have had to happen or would have happened if you signed Tom Brady. So, I'll take Justin Herbert. And, I truly believe that Justin Herbert has, best Charger of all time ceiling potential. And so I just think it's a different conversation. And I think we've seen now the best way to really build a contender is get the right quarterback, get him the right head coach, and then kind of go from there. And certainly right now, it seems like the Chargers have done that.
I will say the one thing about Tom Brady is, man, would doing these summer shows be easier if we had Tom Brady and we could just put that in the title and get 10,000 views every video. Yeah. That would be fun. But, we're talking about Jalen Guyton, Tyron Johnson. So that's what we're doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to talk about the GOAT every other episode would absolutely do some wonders for our views and stuff like that. So Buccaneers fans, good for you guys. I'm glad you don't have to talk about Jameis Winston anymore and get to talk about Tom Brady. So we're going to pivot now to, unless either of you have any other thoughts on that.
Nope.
All right. So we're going to talk about Tyron Johnson and Brandon Facyson now. Shelley Smith did a wonderful article for ESPN about some potential breakout candidates for the Chargers or potential, I believe her exact words were under the radar Chargers. And apparently Tyron Johnson has been getting some love. I've listened to every press conference the Chargers coaches have done, and it's not been anything exuberant. But I mean, Tyron Johnson, I think I am a believer in Tyron Johnson's skill set. I think you look at how fast he is and his ability to run routes. I think it's, he should be the wide receiver 3 in my opinion. Alex, we'll start with you on this one. What do you make of Tyron Johnson, breaking out, and what would that look like for you?
I kind of buy the Tyron Johnson hype. I think he's a very possible breakout candidate. And, you mentioned the speed, and I don't think it's just that he has speed. It's that his overall athletic package is really good. I mean, obviously, we talk about the fact that he was a 5-star recruit at LSU. And unlike Jalen Guyton, who, Jalen Guyton and Tyron Johnson are equally fast, but Jalen Guyton's ceiling is kind of Travis Benjamin. That's what his kind of peak is in terms of, what, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, in terms of what Benjamin was more with the Browns than the Chargers, but, there you go. So if he can go up and get that deep ball, that's great. And, reduce his drops. But Johnson, I think, as Steven pointed out, is the better route runner and can do more with his overall athleticism than just run in a straight line and, eventually outspeed the defender. So to me, I buy the hype. I think that I don't know if he's really what his stats would be. That kind of depends on what they think of Josh Palmer. What does his coaching staff think of Jalen Guyton?
Yeah.
But I mean, in 12 games last year, he had almost 400 yards, which was more than I thought he had. Just thinking back to it when I was writing my article this week. So, that's really 30, 40 yards a game production just being dropped off from the practice squad into the team. Some games he had more than others, but to me, that's kind of, if he could do that in year one, coming off the practice squad, what he can do in year two with a full off season and a full preseason and working with Justin Herbert, I think that's very tantalizing. So, we disagree on some breakout candidates like Jerry Tillery, but Tyron Johnson, I am full lockstep with. I think that he could be a real breakout candidate, especially considering his restricted free agent status this year and the fact that he could get the bag from another team next year.
I buy Tyron Johnson as a breakout candidate. I don't necessarily buy the article that it's like he's an under the radar guy that the coaches are hyping up like crazy, because I feel like every Chargers fan knew about Tyron Johnson after last season. And then, like Steven said, I don't remember him being brought up a ton, being hyped by coaches. And sure, our access is very different. We only get a couple of press conferences from a couple of coaches, but I just don't remember them being like, Tyron Johnson, man. It's always been kind of a Mike Williams thing. But the ceiling is there. He's a number 5 wide receiver recruit coming out of high school, and a guy who averaged 16 yards per catch coming out of high school, or in college.
Yeah.
And, I don't recall exactly why it didn't work out, but the ceiling is definitely there. And while Guyton and Johnson early on, they're both kind of like they each had like 50-yard receptions in the Bucks game or whatever it was, and they were known as those deep guys. But then Guyton never fixed his drop issues, and he certainly never really seemed to be much of a route runner. Whereas Johnson had good hands as is, and he started to develop not just having that speed, of course, but also being able to use that speed so the defense had to respect him, and then learning how to take everything underneath and run all sorts of certain different things. My only question, which I think Johnson can do this, I don't see why this would be a problem, but they had a different role last season between Johnson and Guyton, where Guyton played a lot more in the slot than Johnson did. The percentage of his snaps that Guyton played in the slot were more than double that of Johnson. I don't see why Johnson couldn't do that. But if they see Johnson as, only an outside guy, then is he stuck behind the 2 receivers that they have? Or is he an interchangeable piece? Is it because they want Allen to come inside? They want him to be that receiver that comes inside when you're kind of the fun toy of the offense. So is Johnson your outside guy then across opposite Mike Williams? So I kind of have to wait and see what his role is going to be. If they think he can play inside outside, shoe in wide receiver 3. There's no reason that Guyton should be starting over him, except for the fact that he's like slightly more, not experienced, but he caught more balls, had more targets last season. So I absolutely think he can take that wide receiver 3 spot. He should. He absolutely is a breakout candidate. I'm waiting to see what they think of him in his role. But it is good to see him take. It looks like he was taking Herbert was throwing him some footballs, which means he's probably out there with the first team. So which is great. I don't know how much Keenan Allen or Mike Williams are actually playing at that time, but the coaches have been very tactical with who they've hyped up and who they've left out. And if they are hyping this guy up, which I haven't really heard or seen, but if Shelley Smith is right and they are hyping him up, then I believe it's legit, because they are very tactical with who they hype up. And if they are hyping him up, then we should expect big things.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm so curious to see how this offense and specifically this wide receiver room, fits together and really fits what Joe Lombardi's vision is. Because, like, when I look at these players, I can kind of see why Mike Williams and Michael Thomas are drawing some comparisons. I can definitely see why Keenan Allen and Mike Thomas would get some comparisons, and Keenan Allen and Willie Snead. That one makes sense. But in terms of like the speed guy that the Saints have generally had, a Roquan Smith, a Ted Ginn, those guys are almost always outside players, right? And guys who are able to kind of just take the top off and that's their role, is to make sure that the defense is always paying attention to them. You go deep, and then Michael Thomas, Jimmy Graham, Marcus Golson, they're all going across the middle. And so like you just mentioned, Jalen Guyton did a lot more out of the slot than out wide. He did, it was essentially, about 50-50 for him. But Tyron Johnson was 80% out wide. He was rarely going into the slot. And of course, some of that is, you have Austin Eckler in the slot, and you have Jalen Guyton in the slot, and this year you'll have Jared Cook in the slot. So, Tyron Johnson being exclusively an outside receiver, I don't know if that hurts him or helps him, right? Because we don't know enough about this offense right now. And so I think Tyron Johnson absolutely has the skill set. And then, I'm looking at their Pro Football Focus profiles right now and looking at Jalen Guyton's 6 drops and Tyron Johnson's 0 drops. Granted, fewer targets and stuff like that. But I don't know, man. Like, I'm just looking at all of these numbers and just looking at everything. I don't see a reason why, Tyron Johnson can't take that next step. And, how much that develops into statistics for him, I'm not really sure. It's a very crowded offensive skill group. But I think if Tyron Johnson can get up to, 450, 500 yards and maybe, I don't want to say double, but increase his targets by like 25%, I think that could classify as a breakout season for him. And then maybe that kind of, shows the Chargers that, hey, like I can be, as important as Mike Williams in the next offense. And I don't know. It's just a lot up in the air right now, but I absolutely believe that Tyron Johnson could be a breakout player for them.
For sure.
The only other question I have, and I don't know if you know this or remember this, I was actually surprised to see that Jalen Guyton's yards after the catch numbers were so much better than Tyron Johnson's. To me, it looks like in practice, they're running a lot of some sort of crossers and letting these receivers get those yards after the catch, get them in space, get them turning their heads and running upfield or whatever. Do you remember if Guyton, is his yards after the catch more just like he caught it at the 30 on a deep ball and ran the next 30 yards? Or was it like, I don't remember him having a lot of like crosser kind of stuff. Like, I don't remember how much of it was like, say, like Mike Williams against Green Bay or against the Broncos second game, I believe, where he just, gets the ball in the drag or whatever it was and take it to the house. I don't remember. I'm trying to remember what those plays were for Guyton, because the only play I can remember was the drop he had against the Raiders. So I don't, like, I'm trying to remember, like, so I was going to say that Johnson is probably a better yards after catch guy, and I think he could be, but then Guyton was technically in that stat better at that. But I just don't remember the context of those, the numbers.
Yeah, if you look at average depth of target, Tyron Johnson's at 20, Jalen Guyton's at 16. So, to me, that shows that Guyton was running a little bit shorter routes from time to time, and Tyron was really exclusively running go routes. So I don't know, like that is interesting, because I would have thought the same thing, that Tyron's a little more quick twitch than Jalen Guyton is. Maybe they run similar 40 times, but it seems like Tyron Johnson is someone that is more adept at running short area quickness kind of routes than Jalen Guyton is. But and maybe some of that is that I remember they did run a couple screens to Jalen Guyton on occasion, especially when Keenan and Mike were hurt. So maybe that could be contributing. It is interesting though, you talk about yards after catch. The number one player on the Chargers in yards after catch was actually Justin Jackson. So I don't know. That's an interesting statistic. And Steven Anderson was second, and Virgil Green was fourth.
Isn't Virgil Green like basically that one Jaguars catch? Or no, that would be yards after catch. I can't think of a play that Virgil Green had.
I can't think of yards after catch for Green.
Virgil Green had 3 catches. 3 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown. So he had that one touchdown catch against the Jaguars where he broke his ankle. So then on the other ones, he must have gotten, like 16 yards after the catch, essentially.
I really have no memory of that. I only remember the Jaguars catch, and that would have been 0 because it was a touchdown. So I don't know.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see how that one pans out. And so we talked a little bit about Brandon Facyson on our live stream last Friday. He's certainly someone that is pretty polarizing on Chargers Twitter. Just kind of seems like he's someone that is, taking the brunt of some jokes and things like that. But, I'm going to say this again. The context of Brandon Facyson is that he is a former undrafted free agent. And so I always laugh when people like Facyson or Rod Teamer or Michael Davis get treated like they're first round picks and they're bad. And then it's like, well, this is who they are. But it's like, that's not how things work. Like players develop over time. And, unfortunately, players who are undrafted free agents kind of take a little bit longer than we would hope sometimes. And so, I said this before, but I remember talking with Jason last summer about potentially, wanting Brandon Facyson to start instead of Michael Davis. And then look at Michael Davis. Look at the season he had. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities that Facyson does, work himself into a starting role. He becomes a very valuable piece, and he does become a starter or a breakout player, because we just saw the same thing with Michael Davis. Now they're two different players, a little different stylistically. But Tyler, how much do you buy Brandon Facyson potentially being somebody that surprises people and starts and is a breakout player?
There's a couple of ways I could take this. Okay. Context, I guess, from how I view Brandon Facyson, and probably why you and Jason were talking about Facyson starting over Davis last season. I don't remember what Davis had, but in 2019, I forget what the injuries were. Obviously, Verrett or maybe it wasn't Verrett. I don't know. Point is, the cornerback room, per usual, was decimated.
Yeah.
And Facyson was thrust into action against the Colts, like pretty early on in that game. I think he wasn't the starter, but then like 3 plays in, he had to go in. And it was tough. It was really tough against the Colts. But then he goes and plays a little bit better against the Lions the next week. And then the third week against the Texans, he only gave up 8 yards. And that was his last start for a while, but he gave up 61 yards and a touchdown in one game, in that first game. 65 yards, no touchdowns the second game, and then just 8 yards in that third game. And he kind of is gone for a while. The team must have gotten healthy. But then he has, in week 13 and 14, another 2 games, he's thrust into action. And he gives up just 47 total yards in those 2 games, and 10 of them came against Denver, which is interesting because we know that this coaching staff, at least with Staley, they'll watch players, but also like specific players, but they'll also admire who they're going up against. It's kind of why they drafted Josh Palmer. Staley was evaluating probably defensive backs, watching these SEC DBs, and wondering who this guy is that's destroying the DBs that he's scouting. So who was on Denver in 2019 when Facyson was giving up just 10 yards and thrust into action? That was Staley and Ronaldo Hill. So it's possible that they do see a kid with some potential who was unfairly and kind of like Trey Pipkins. Of course, Pipkins is a 3rd-round pick, so there's more expectations there. But, Facyson was kind of unfairly thrust into action and then slowly started to play well with more reps. And so it's interesting that they're giving him these first-team reps over Samuel Jr., which kind of makes sense. That's kind of how the NFL works. Let the rookies, kind of earn their spot. But I could see why they would absolutely give Facyson a fair shake with the first team to see how he can hang with some more prep time. So is a breakout season possible? Like, I think so. And they're at least, I think, doing their due diligence to see what he has and why not. Like, what you have in Samuel Jr., Chris Harris, and Davis. Fayson's kind of a wild card because, he obviously got better in 2019, but he just still doesn't have a whole lot of reps. So I'm glad they're taking a look at him. I guess the only thing I could see is if Harris goes down, like I can't see why Facyson would start week 1, barring injury. But with injuries, say Harris goes down, I guess I could see Samuel Jr. being like the slot guy because I believe both Harris and Samuel Jr. are learning slot, outside, and a little bit of safety. So I do believe that Samuel Jr. can kind of mirror sort of what Harris is doing, and then Facyson could take the outside role because I don't think either Davis or Facyson have much inside experience.
Right.
So I guess that's the way he can get to the breakout season. Like, I don't think he'll be the starter week 1, but I could see it happening. And if he does start at any point in the season, give him some time because he has shown that he can figure it out. It just takes a little bit of time.
Yeah, it kind of depends on, like Tyler said, how do you define breakout candidate? I don't think he's going to be starting outside for all 16 games. I would kind of be very surprised if that was the case. Granted, I would have also been surprised, if you said that with Michael Davis this year, and Michael Davis was awesome, right? So to me, I would kind of say I think that they are probably just trying to work Samuel Jr. into that role, but I do think
Probably.
when Samuel Jr. eventually does become the outside corner, that Facyson will still have some kind of rotational role where he comes onto the field more, at least by what they're kind of saying now, and the reps that they're giving him, at least more than somebody like say Devon Campbell, who had to come on last year and who was getting reps really before Facyson did. Or some of the other players who came in when Casey Hayward went down. They didn't even put Brandon Facyson on the field last year. They put Jalen Watkins was at corner for a while in some spots. So that was a little bit of a weird time. But the last coaching staff wasn't super thrilled with Fayson's development. I'm cautiously optimistic, I guess, when it comes to Facyson, just because I do still want to see how it progresses and maybe how his ball skills are different than, say, they were in years past. But I do think that there is potential for a breakout, depending on how you define breakout. I think Tyron Johnson is, when we talk about these two players, much more likely to be the actual breakout player who ends up, landing some kind of big contract, whether that's with the Chargers or somewhere else, next season, versus Facyson, it would just be getting more snaps and becoming a bit more diversified as a corner. So that, I think, would be a good breakout season if he is playable, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree with that one for sure. And, just looking at or listening to Derek Ansley's comments about Brandon Facyson, I can kind of see what they're looking at with him. He mentioned his size, his physicality, his tackling ability, all things that are important in, Brandon Staley's scheme, which is going to play a lot of quarters, ask your corners to play off coverage, quite a bit, and then be able to come up and tackle. So I can understand that. I can kind of see him maybe taking some snaps at kind of the star money role a little bit because of his size. I would be shocked if he starts over Asante Samuel Jr. I think that the pure talent of those two players is very different. And, I tend to think that Facyson starting with the ones is more about them trying to make Samuel earn it, maybe bringing him in along a little bit more slowly. If Facyson starting week one, then I would be very, very surprised. Will he have a role? Yes, because the Chargers are going to be playing so many defensive backs that he's going to play. Mark Webb's going to play. Alohi Gilman's going to play. All these players will see the field, and we'll know pretty quickly if they're effective players or not, just because of the sheer amount of people that Staley is going to rotate in. But I agree with Alex. I buy Tyron Johnson much more likely as a breakout guy than Brandon Facyson.
Yeah, I agree.
But, we'll see. I know we kind of made the jokes, but I am excited to see how these two players pan out. I'm also excited to talk about the edge rushers, and this is where we're going to break it down and have some similar conversations like we did about the defensive tackle room. I think the biggest thing, with this edge rusher class, edge rusher group specifically is, who stays healthy, right? I know I kind of led the same thing with the group. If the Chargers can withstand a Linval Joseph injury, but Joey Bosa has had various struggles with injury, and so has Uchenna Nwosu. We don't know about Chris Rumpf yet. Kyler Fackrell has been mostly a supporting role. So who, I guess, wording it differently, who opposite of Joey Bosa locks down that other edge rusher role? Because while I think this team is very excited about Uchenna Nwosu, I wouldn't be shocked if Kyler Fackrell kind of takes that spot from him. I think that is in the realm of possibilities. I don't know about you guys, but I don't know if this coaching staff is all in on Uchenna Nwosu like we all think they are.
I think you're insane. I don't think there's any shot that Nwosu gets upseated by Fackrell or Rumpf, unless Nwosu, something off the field we don't know about. I'd be absolutely stunned if Nwosu loses his job to either of those two guys.
Yeah, I don't think there's any chance that happens. Also because, Rumph, I don't think he's really playable in a starting role at this point. I think he can be
Right.
rotational guy for sure. And, if something happens to Joey Bosa, if something happens to Uchenna Nwosu, then you kind of have no choice but to put Chris Rumph in, or, you're moving Jerry Tillery to edge or something like that. But to me, yeah, I don't think they really have a guy that's playable other than Fackrell in certain spots, but I don't think that they that they plan on using him in a way that's just going to be every down. And Nwosu was unfortunate last year because he had the knee thing towards the end of the year. Also had an injury in November, if I recall. Did he have a COVID thing? I don't remember if he had COVID or not. I can't think, because for some reason I mentally had that in my head for a while. I don't think he did, because I did a Google and nothing came up other than his injuries. But for some reason I remember that. I don't know why. But yeah, so I think that the injuries are not too concerning to worry about for the long term. Obviously, we are entering a 17-game season, so I think if he had, something that was a more drastic injury, such as a tear of some ligament or something like that, I would be a little bit more worried. Bosa is the one that, because it is specifically concussions and how long he had to miss last year, when we're talking about 4 or 5 games. And once you get one concussion, you're kind of more likely to deal with that, for the rest of your career. I think that's going to be a tough one to watch. Obviously, I hope he stays healthy. I think he generally will still play, at the very least 12 or 13 games, barring some kind of other injury. But that's something that concerns me, just because I do think he may have to miss a game here or there, or, like last season, come out of a game because of the concussion protocol. So that, does worry me a little bit more than Nwosu, because, the football injuries can happen to any player. And you can make the case that Nwosu can get concussed, but just because we saw that happen with Bosa last year twice, that's something that is probably the most concerning thing to me on the line, because they can kind of like patchwork it for Nwosu. They really can't patchwork it for Bosa if he's out at all.
Yeah, I guess my thinking with the Kyler Fackrell thing is, maybe I'm just scarred by Anthony Lynn and Gus Bradley saying that they were still trying to figure him out, 17 weeks into year 3. So I don't know. I just, I think Nwosu is going to be a really solid player for them. I know a lot of people have kind of, dogged on the Chargers defensive line because they don't really have a true star next to Bosa. But I do think that Nwosu can be a very, very solid and effective pass rusher. I don't know if we'll see him be like prime Melvin Ingram, but I do think that Nwosu, if he stays healthy, can be a solid secondary pass rusher guy. I guess the next logical step here, we kind of talked about this a little bit on our live show, but there was the comment from Joey Bosa that he is going to be dropping into coverage a little bit more. And like I said, we did talk about this on our live show, but not everybody who watches our lives listens to our episodes. So we are going to talk about this again. Alex, do you think, what do you make of Joey Bosa dropping into coverage, and should people be concerned about it? Should people be excited about it? What's your general thought process on Bosa dropping into coverage more often?
Yeah, dropping into coverage is kind of a vague term. Joey Bosa is not going to be, lining up aside from like Jerry Jeudy, and they're just going to be like, hey, go get anything. That's not really what's going to happen. I think, on the inside, you might have like running backs or tight ends that, just kind of slip, and, Joey Bosa maybe has to go after that guy. We've seen some of the same thing with, Uchenna Nwosu in the past on certain situations. Melvin Ingram, maybe has before. I think it's just more that the Staley system views their edges as pretty much all kind of flexible outside linebackers in a way. So to me, I'm not really concerned or excited about Joey Bosa dropping into pass coverage. It's just something that's going to be different, compared to the previous regime and Gus Bradley. So I'm not too concerned.
I mean, listen, I'd much rather have Joey Bosa drop into coverage than like the 4 times Linval Joseph had to do it last season for whatever reason. So we're already a step up there. But I think they brought, is it going to happen? Sure. Bosa at some point is going to have to drop into coverage. It just is what it is. That's the NFL. But I do believe that they brought in Fackrell and Rumpf to alleviate some of those issues. And maybe on third down, I don't know what the play is called or how they want to mix and match their defense. But, put your defensive tackle and Joey Bosa on one side and let Fackrell or Rumpf. Fackrell did it plenty of times. Not that I've watched all of his game film, but other things that I just kind of blew through and watched him in pass coverage. He's very quick to get out to the flat to get that running back. Very instinctive that way. Either running back or like a screen. And then Rumpf is another guy you could also do that as well. A guy you can mix and match behind Bosa, who can also, I forget what that first game was that I watched of his. It's not the Miami game. It's his good game. Steven, you can remind me. It was his good game that kind of changed your mind a little bit.
Oh, North
But
Carolina?
in that game, he had probably. Anyway, in that game, he had 2 reps where he's the guy lined up behind the tackle, and then he takes off to go cover the running back in the flat. So I do think that he can kind of take. I think both of these guys can alleviate some of those things. So is Bosa going to be in coverage at some point? Sure. But I do think there's players that you can mix and match behind him to kind of not force him to be in that role. I don't think Staley's stupid. I don't think he's going to be like, well, I don't know. I want Bosa out there, so I'll just have him out there because he's really talented. No, I do think they're going to let him put his hand in the dirt. And if he drops into coverage, so what? But he won't have to do it as often. And I think they brought in those 2 guys to really help alleviate some of those concerns.
Well, and to your point, Nwosu can do that same kind of thing as well. That's what he did his rookie season was rush the passer, drop back into the coverage. He was kind of that Sam linebacker / edge hybrid. So I'm not concerned about Joey Bosa dropping into coverage either. It's not going to be like Alex said, him lining up, matching up with someone. I assume it's mostly going to be, him covering the flat, maybe dropping back over the middle, covering, the hitch areas, and really just gives the Chargers options. And the main thing that I've learned while watching Brandon Staley's defense and listening to him talk and listening to other people talk about football, it's all about creating mismatches and dictating terms to the offense, right? And so you can kind of picture it. I can definitely do a breakdown on this kind of thing, later on in the summer. But essentially, you're going to bring 5-6 guys to the line of scrimmage. Ideally, you want to overload one side of the ball, and sometimes that means you might have someone in the A gap, someone in the B gap, someone outside. Maybe the outside person drops back every once in a while and kind of confuses the offensive line. Like that's the whole goal, is to mix up your looks, mix up your games. And if that means that Joey Bosa drops into the flat or drops 5 yards straight back, maybe he spies the quarterback every once in a while against someone like Patrick Mahomes. That really is the whole thing, is you're just trying to confuse the offensive line and allow your defense to dictate terms to the offense. And so this is just another way for them to kind of seek out one-on-one opportunities for all of their players. Obviously, if Joey Bosa is dropping into coverage, you're not getting a one-on-one matchup for Bosa, but you're trying to get a one-on-one matchup for maybe Kenneth Murray up the A gap. Maybe your goal is to try and get Kenneth Murray against a running back instead of an offensive lineman. Maybe your goal is to try to get a guard against Jerry Tillery. So it just kind of is a way for the Chargers to mix things up, confuse the offensive line, and dictate terms.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And, Staley ultimately plays to his defensive strengths, like you said. So, I haven't watched a video of this, and I don't know, but I'm going to guess that, Aaron Donald wasn't, lining up against wide receivers, although that would be terrifying if I was a wide receiver. So Aaron Donald coming in pass coverage. But, so I don't think there's really anything to worry about other than just, well, they view these guys as having to do these things on occasion. And like you pointed out, and like I pointed out a bunch of times last year, you have to have a QB spy. And it was so frustrating when Gus Bradley didn't do that last year. So if you have Joey Bosa doing that occasionally on snaps, I think that's fine. And I also think that that's fine if Nwosu wants to do it sometimes too.
So just
to your point, Alex. Oh, go for it, Steven.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, just a quick thing. To your point, Alex, Aaron Donald had 0 coverage snaps last season, but he has 3 games graded in coverage from PFF. So
that makes sense. That makes sense. Joey Bosa did have 2 coverage snaps last year, for what it's worth, which is less than Jerry Tillery, Melvin Ingram, Uchenna Nwosu, and the same amount as Linval Joseph. So Gus Bradley didn't really drop defensive lines very often, but I think, we'll essentially see it happen like once every other game is my thinking with Joey Bosa.
Sure.
I think the other outside linebackers, like Tyler was saying, will absolutely drop back more often. All right, guys, what other questions do you have, or what questions do you need to be answered for this edge group?
I think the biggest one is probably just kind of, what is Kyler Fackrell? I mean, like, I do think he's a good rotational pass rusher, but, can he hold up against the run? Because I think that's kind of the most important thing when we're talking about the guys that are going to fill in for Nwosu or Bosa on specific snaps. And the guys that you had, kind of doing that last year, Isaac Rochelle occasional, most of the time, and Jerry Tillery occasionally do it. Like, it's just tough, I think, for, to really cover the edge like that. And so I think Kyler Fackrell is a good pass rusher. I just don't know about his ability to hold up against the run anymore. I don't have too many specific stats on this, but just from watching film, the Giants didn't really use him in too many of those situations. Kind of when he was starting for the Packers, he did, but he hasn't really had to sort of be, not a permanent edge, but a guy who has to really fill in rotationally for a while in the way that he would be needed to do that in this defense. Certainly the Giants used him as a guy that maybe would drop into coverage more as opposed to a pass rusher. And so I would kind of think that's kind of the determining factor, because they have let a lot of guys walk in free agency, or, just really just had no use for them anymore, maybe in their current defense. So I think that's going to be interesting to watch. And that is a big factor also in terms of Rumph too, because I know there's a lot of Chris Rumph fans, and I'm not necessarily against Chris Rumph. I just sort of think he's, a year away from really, kind of obviously growing into his body, but, being able to be playable in some of these late game situations. I don't know if year 1 is going to be the year for that. So we'll see. But yeah, I think Kyler Fackrell is really the X factor in terms of how this whole thing works.
I will stay away from Chris Rumph slander, because apparently people don't like when you objectively post 30 plays from a game, but whatever. My question for Rumph is he the key to this defense, at least maybe the front 7, being multiple and freeing up Joey Bosa? Because, look, fine, some slander. He's not a good run defender. Like, he's a horrific down to down run defender. Are there flashes? Absolutely. When he lines up against a guard and beats him across the middle or over the middle, through the gap, whatever, he's great. But that's not a consistent thing. That's not every down he's lined up against the center or guard.
Yeah.
But he's not really brought in to be an edge setting run defender. And of course, he has to do that one day to start. But, the role that I would envision for him, and this was sort of more reserved, at least in a little bit that I've watched, more for a linebacker with the Rams. But, is he that third guy that rushes, when you say overloading one side, to give Joey Bosa that one-on-one when his hand's in the dirt? Because you can put your defensive tackle on the center and Joey Bosa on the guard, and, have your stand-up edge rusher like they have with Floyd Donald, another stand-up edge rusher on the Rams. Is he the guy that they're going to bring to free up? They have options. They have Derwin James. They have Kenneth Murray. They have Drew Tranquil. They have plenty of options. Hell, Nick Neiman blitzed. But, for me, I think, I want to see his role, because I do think that he potentially, and why I say he'll be a better pro than a college player, that I think he might be the key to getting Joey Bosa those free one-on-one reps, because they're going to try to overload one side with Chris Rumph. So that's the question I want answered. What is his role, and is he the key to freeing up Joey Bosa, or is it another player?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Both of those are interesting. So to Alex's point first, Kyler Fackrell, it's PFF, right? He has a 66 run defense grade. He had 18 run stops, which is more than Nwosu, more than Isaac Rochelle. Isaac Rochelle had 16. Nwosu had 15. It's more than Frank Clark, Yannick Ngakoue by 1. And he ranks tied for 51st in run stops among the edge rusher players. So as a complementary player, that's pretty solid. I think he's okay at run defense. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say he's like this amazing run defender, but he can do it. And I think the numbers in the film point to him being an average to slightly above average run defender. And that's a similar thing to what Isaac Rochelle was as well. Obviously, I think he offers a little bit more of a pass rush ability than Isaac Rochelle does. We'll have to see how that pans out this year. But I think, you're signing Kyler Fackrell because he's solid, right? You're hoping that he's, kind of a stabilizing force for a unit that had a lot of injuries last year and can be an upgrade over Isaac Rochelle. As it pertains to Chris Rumph, I think in an ideal world for him as a rookie, I think we see him play 10 to 15 snaps a game, obviously assuming that everybody in front of him is healthy. Jerry Tillery kind of had that treatment as a rookie because, like you said, he's got to continue to develop both as a player on the field and, his physical profile off the field. I think he's far from done growing. He's got great length and he's got really good athleticism, but he's got to figure out a way to kind of combine the two because, when I interviewed the reporter from Duke, he was saying that, Duke had him add some weight and it didn't really pan out. He kind of lost a bit of a step because he wasn't comfortable playing with that weight. And listen, like he can't play edge at 225. He's got to figure out a way to play edge effectively in the NFL at 240, 245, and that's going to take a little bit. So, I'm a little less low on him than I was initially, of course, but, I do have some concerns because he's got to figure out how to grow his body, develop his body to a point where he can, fit the profile of what they're looking at because Uchenna Nwosu is he's a very filled out 245. Kyler Fackrell is 250. Jerry Tillery, if you want to play him on the edge, he's 280, 290. Like you've got to get to the point where your speed and athleticism is not deterred by adding weight. So that's my concern with him, specifically against the run, because there aren't any other edge rushers out there playing at 225, setting the edge and being effective run stoppers. So I think, in an ideal world, like I said, give Chris Rumph 10, 15 snaps a game, give him a couple run snaps a game just to see what he can do and have most of it be, rushing the passer, dropping into coverage and things like that. And then the last thing I wanted to point out here, Kyler Fackrell actually had 100 coverage snaps last year. So obviously the schemes are not, straight across. They're not super similar with what the Patriots and Giants and Dolphins are running. But he dropped it into coverage way more than any, Rams outside linebacker did. So it is interesting. Maybe that's kind of something that they can exploit. But that's the last thing I want to talk about with Kyler Fackrell.
Yeah, I just sort of thought
3.
No, I just sort of thought watching Fackrell's tape with the Giants that he definitely dropped into coverage. I felt more than he was a run defender, so I think that's something to watch. Maybe even more than Uchenna Nwosu. He's a guy that's going to drop into pass coverage pretty often. I wouldn't be surprised about that. I do think it's funny that we're talking about Chris Rumph needing to gain weight. In the last episode, we just talked about how Linval Joseph and Justin Jones lost like 20 pounds. But yeah, different positions need different things. I think the weight thing and trying to kind of gauge that is going to be interesting. I wonder if when Rumph is on the field, kind of like Tyler said, maybe they'll devise something to be able to like kind of take the stress off him a little bit, in the sense of maybe like, letting Kenneth Murray kind of just be near him one play. And like, if, someone does come, rushing up the middle, hey, you can, just bring him down there. Like, I think that could be an interesting thing to play around with, or at least making it so his weight isn't a liability. Because I don't think he's gonna, necessarily gain 20 pounds or 30 pounds in the next 2 months.
Right.
Obviously, training camp could be a very different.
I will.
Training camp could be a very different animal. But I think it'll be interesting to watch just how they use the other players to kind of take the stress off, not just a player like Rumpf, but also a rookie like Webb in the secondary.
Yeah. To Tyler's point, there's a Raising Cane's that's being built down the street for me, so that's gonna be dangerous.
It's a race.
It is a race. The last note I have here today, we kind of talked about, is Emeka Egbole a linebacker? Is he an edge? Where is Joe Gaziano fitting in? Daniel Popper did his last article last week, and he pointed out that Emeka Egbole and Jesse Lemonnier are working with the edge rushers. They're working with Jay Rogers, Joey Bosa, and Wilson, all those guys. And Joe Gaziano is actually working with the interior pass rushers. So Gaziano is working as essentially, defensive tackle, if you will. I don't know. We'll have to get into if that changes roster predictions for any of us down the road. But just wanted to make everyone aware that, if you're looking at Joe Gaziano, he's not a 3-4 outside linebacker type. Like, they're working him in with the defensive tackles, and Emeka Egbole is an edge rusher.
Yeah, cool. That makes sense. I think you, Jason, and I had him as a potential defensive tackle. Like, I think he was a D end in college, and we thought, hey, maybe he should bulk up and play D tackles. That's interesting.
Another player who needs to gain weight.
Well, I think not very much, right? Because he is, on the heavier side of things for the edge rushers. I think he's a powerful player, and if you're working him in, as a rotational, like 5 technique defensive tackle, defensive end, I think that could be a role for him. I still would be surprised if he makes a roster, frankly, just because of who else is in front of him. But hey, I think this maybe gives him a better chance. So, all right, guys, any other thoughts before we wrap up today's show? Awkward silence. I'm assuming that means no.
I'm on it.
Okay, go, Tyler, go.
If you need a player who doesn't have to gain any weight, who can play D end or D tackle, Darius Bradwell's always available.
Shit.
I mean, he could probably, if him and
he's 235.
No way is he that light.
He's listed at 235 right now. That's too light, you think?
Did you see the picture of him walking in front of Justin Jackson, dude? Wait. What is Gabe Neighbors listed at?
Okay, hold on, listeners. Gabe Neighbors is 235.
There's no way that those two are the same.
He's 3 inches taller.
Yeah, I don't believe that.
Bradwell's 6 foot and 235. So he's like,
Gabe is 6'3"?
Shorter. Apparently. Says Google. What do I know?
There's no way, man. There's no way that Bradwell's only 235.
That's like Google listing Kevin Durant at 6'8" when he's actually like 7 feet tall.
Oh man, that picture of him next to Boogie Cousins at the Olympics always cracks me up because they're both listed at the same height, and Durant is clearly like 3 inches taller.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll verify Darius Bradwell's weight for next time.
Let's get Darius Bradwell on the show to ask him about his weight.
It's the weight version of Donald Parham. I feel like Donald Parham's actually like 7 feet tall. I feel like Darius Bradwell is actually probably like 245, 250. But yeah. Anyway, so that's gonna do it for us today, guys. I'm gonna be out of town next week, so it's gonna be just Tyler and Alex for the next episode or two, depending on when I can get back from visiting my family in Utah. So those two are gonna have a great time this week. Looking forward to listening to those myself. As always, leave us a rating or a review on the audio platforms. Leave us a comment and make sure and subscribe to the channel. All of the more subscribers are obviously welcome and help us out a lot. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.
God help us all just trying to figure out how me or Tyler are going to host a show.
We'll be fine. I did it for 2 months. We're good.
Bye, guys.